in Johnny River. I've been with psilocybin, MDMA, cannabis, DMT. That's it. Coffee, sugar, and cacao. Yeah. The first into my life was cannabis, and that sort of just started coming into my life. I started getting it from a customer at the coffee shop where I worked. And that was a little bit before it was legal. And I never was going to go out of my way to try to find somewhere to get weed before that. But at this point, I just all of a sudden I had it. And so it was like, at that point I didn't have any moral or ethical reasons why I shouldn't do it in my life. And so Bailey and I just started smoking that. And that triggered a huge transformation in our relationship. That space allowed us to communicate things with each other that we had never shared before. We just both felt way more open than we had before. And our marriage wasn't, our marriage wasn't necessarily like massively struggling or anything before that, but that just completely changed the way that we were able to communicate, I suppose. And there's also the anxiety enhancing effects of cannabis, and so I feel like that allowed me to see how I kind of amplified how I feel around other people, and seeing how anxious I had felt or self-conscious, just kind of amplified those feelings. And the first times I was high around other people, you're kind of like, am I being weird? And there's always that. It's hard to say whether it some people be like, oh, smoking weed makes me anxious. It's like, does it make you anxious, or does it make your anxieties just that much more obvious? It's hard to say. With mushrooms, my whole life I was just taught that mushrooms are just drugs, and basically to me it was just what people would do after they'd smoked weed for a long time and they wanted to do something harder. They would do mushrooms. And I just associated it with like hippie culture and tripping, and then also I guess just with like the druggies, I guess. People who did drugs. And then when I was in South Africa, Bailey and I stayed with these guys, Joe and Ray, and they were the first people that ever introduced the idea of mushrooms to me as transformative. And I'd never heard anyone really mention that before. And so that really piqued my interest. I remember listening to some Terrence McKenna with Ray, I think. He had worked for an organization in South Africa that I think was using iboga to help people overcome addiction. So he had experience with these things that I had never even been exposed to. And so for the next 5 years, having come back home, the next 5 years I did a ton of research and started digging into people's stories and anything I could find on mushrooms, and talking to a ton of people, just asking people if they'd done it, what their experience was. My biggest fear was not being in control of what I'm doing. I had this idea that I just be like taken over and just, I don't know, kind of somehow that image got into my mind as a kid, that I could just do something completely foreign to me and have no control over what I'm doing like that. When I went back to South Africa 5 years later, I did mushrooms for the first time. with a good friend who I felt super safe with, who had had a number of experiences with them. And that was just beautiful. Like no real challenging moments. Just on the beach at sunset north of Cape Town. Yeah, that was just a beautiful, beautiful evening. Eating a passion fruit with Charat. So good. And probably for, I don't know, for like 3 to 6 months after that day, I just felt completely unflusterable. Like nothing could upset me. Just rode that experience for a while. It completely like changed how I understood my life in a way. There were one interesting thing about the first experience was all these things that people had said to me throughout my life, or I'd read somewhere or heard someone say on a recording that had stood out to me but didn't make sense. I had like cataloged them in some way, and then they all flooded back to me, and I could like understand something about them that I hadn't understood before. And that's in the midst of the mushroom experience. All these things that people had said to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I see what they mean now. That was really fun. And then also just feeling the ways that I edit what I'm doing or how I'm being or how I'm holding myself or how I'm talking, or just any way that I express myself. Editing it for other people. Or out of fear of other people, what they might think of me, what judgments they might have, how it might disrupt them or what they're doing, and way beyond just common courtesy, and more like an editing of who I am, my personality, to try to please other people. So to be able to deeply feel into that allowed me in many ways to just practice dropping that continually over the next few months. And to this day, still integrating that one. And so after that, there was a number of trips that followed with friends that I wanted to share mushrooms with. Come back home, talk to your friends, like, oh my gosh, guys, listen. And so yeah, that was super fun and transformed those relationships in major ways, opened up channels of communication that hadn't been open before, increased the level of vulnerability and intimacy and just closeness in those relationships. I feel like our relationship is far closer and more intimate now for all of our experiences together. And yeah, just feeling such a deep love and openness for the people that I'm with and for just anyone that I know in my life. I was telling someone the other day that during every mushroom trip, there's familiar chapters. There are always these epic sagas that almost divide into like their own discrete chapters. And one of them is always a love inventory, where it's just like going through the list of people in my life that I love and just feeling like overwhelmed in the best way by that love. And yeah, I feel like every trip I've had involves that one. There's always the one too that's like, oh shit, what did I do? Like, was this a bad idea? That one always passes. So from there, MDMA came into my life at one point. That one, my biggest fear for that, mushrooms in some ways feels, or at least at that time felt very cerebral, intellectual in some way. And so the fear there was that I was going to encounter some idea or some thought or some story that would be terrifying. Whereas with MDMA, the major fear was that I would literally do something with my body that I would terrify me, or that I would then feel ashamed or embarrassed of in the next day and the weeks after. So my idea of it was very much more like a physical body experience rather than an intellectual, cerebral experience in that way. The ideas I had about MDMA before were mostly related to raves, I guess. And remembering kids in high school going to raves and doing ecstasy. And all I'd really ever heard about it was that people either do not drink enough water and die, or they would drink too much water and die. Either way, you're dead. Those were like big concerns that people had. And I guess I must have known that it like gave people energy. There was a time in my life when I couldn't even conceptualize what a drug experience was like. Again, it always came down to like lack of control, that you're somehow in just like some completely involuntary space. But then having smoked weed, having done mushrooms, but still having no experience with MDMA, the more I talked to people, the general vibe I got was just like super loving, touchy, physical, that sort of vibe. And so that was why, I think that was where the fear of, oh, am I gonna do something that I'm gonna be horrified of when I wake up the next morning. I mean, the first experience was with a small group of people, most of whom I knew quite well and felt very comfortable with, and then close people of those people. And that was, as soon as that took effect, there was no more concern of, like, it was just all the love that I've ever felt and that I feel all the time, just right there, and no inhibition, but not in the way that I could ever be capable of like doing something rash or crossing someone's boundary. Because at the same time, while I was completely open in so many ways, I was also felt super sensitive to how everyone else was feeling, and there's no desire to cross someone else's boundary. There's just like the utmost respect and love for that person and care. And no feelings that felt foreign to me. All the normal love that I feel for humanity, for individual people, for the people around me, for my experience, but just all there, all at once. And that experience taught me a new way of feeling, I guess, that I can now always return to if I just take a moment to like have a flashback or just remember back to that feeling's always with me, and I can like cultivate it now. And not only that, it created a connection between intimacy and joy that I can now, like with the drug, you take the drug and then experience the intimacy as a result of feeling that open. But now I can reverse engineer it, where I can open myself up, I can be intimate and vulnerable with somebody, and that takes me back to the feeling of absolute ecstasy. And so I can like recreate the drug feeling by engaging in the intimacy, by holding another person, by like being with someone. So that was, to me, is like the gift of that experience. Because with MDMA, the ability to communicate is so just open and clear and effortless. It's like the intuition is just fully on board. Whereas on mushrooms, words could just mean anything. And trying to decide on a word is a whole process. And I can feel the same way on mushrooms. Just that absolute ecstasy and joy and love and openness. But I'm not going to talk to anyone about it. That first night on MDMA, there were lots of things that there was like snuggling with people and like sharing things and like just being with people in ways that I would have thought would have maybe embarrassed me, before that. But then to have that experience, there's absolutely no shame. If anything, the reverse. Like, so much shame that I'd carried with me in my life around touch and sexuality and sensuality and pleasure, I've since then been able to drop and heal and integrate and like completely reframe. It's been just the opposite. In some ways, it's a very concrete process. So I think of these molecules, at least for me, as training wheels, where they take me into a way of feeling, a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of being with other people, a way of communicating that I then have in my memory bank. And then I can then, for the weeks, months, years after that, find opportunities to return to that way of feeling, that way of being, that way of relating outside of the drug experience. Because I now know what it feels like. So it's like, okay, I know what that feels like. I don't have the molecule with me necessarily right now, but I know I can get back there. Or at the very least, I can think, okay, like we've held each other now, we've talked openly and vulnerable with each other now during this experience, and so now let's do that again without it. And let's try to ride without training wheels now. And because we've created this safety of this experience where there was never even a thought of it being unsafe. And so even when there's the fear here now, we can be with it, breathe through it, whatever it is. And so then it becomes actually practicing, getting repetitions in a way of these ways of being in my everyday life that I first glimpsed in these peak experiences. And then there's also there's a mental process that's far more spontaneous. I don't necessarily have a practice of journaling. I feel like the integration happens in some ways on its own. With MDMA, for example, the integration with that was incredibly intense in the best way. There was a lot of tears that came through initially after that first experience, which has been such a amazing relief and release. Because there's probably years before that I didn't cry at all. Being that deeply in touch with my emotions and feelings and pleasure and sensation, just about a week after that, my first experience with MDMA, I was home alone. I started crying, I think because I saw a photo of somebody that I loved and I just thought about him and started crying. And in that moment, I realized that I'd never once, except when I was a baby, let myself fully cry. At least not in my adult life. Maybe there was times as a kid, but for the most part, anytime I could remember crying, which was rare, I was in some ways holding it back. And it felt almost painful to cry. And so no one's home. And so I think, okay, I'm gonna just make a nice spot for me here on the floor, lay down, and just see what crying is like. Like whatever sounds need to come out, however my body wants to move, whatever needs to happen, I'm open to it, and let's just see what crying is. So I let myself just fully cry for the first time. And eventually, like, my body was shaking, and at some point it turned into like a belly laugh, and then back to crying, and then back to a laugh. And in that moment I felt like crying and laughing were just the exact same thing in a way, almost interchangeable. Most of that time I had my eyes closed was having all these memories flood back to me of all the times in my life that I, like from the earliest times of having a crush on a girl in first grade and not really understanding what that was, and just wanting to be close to this girl. And I don't know why, but I just kind of want to be close to her and I want to talk to her, but that sounds terrifying. All the way up through elementary school, middle school, girlfriends, any woman that I had ever felt drawn to. And all of these memories of feeling an incredible amount of shame around those moments. But I saw every single one of those memories in a completely different light. And rather than feeling shame, I could see the love and the care that I had for these girls and women, and my desire to like support them and be with them. And I saw like the beauty of us learning together how to be in relationship. And I wasn't always being perfect or like doing things that I was proud of, but even in those moments, just seeing the beauty of all of it. And so all of these memories that were formerly shame became beautiful. And then by the time and that was like, I would think about a girl or a woman and feel the deep love that I had felt for her, the sweet moments we had had, and cry through that, and then start laughing about it. Like it went from like sadness to love. The sadness was only because of love. And then beneath the love was the laughter of just like how crazy life is and how deep of emotion that we get to feel, and just like how insane is love, and just cracking up about that basically. And then back to something sad, so back to crying, so it just created this cycle of laughing and crying for probably an hour and a half. And then eventually I felt like, okay, I think that's it. And I got up and who knows, maybe made dinner or something. But so that felt like just a spontaneous integration of being able to go back to all these memories, or have them come back to me, have them be all changed and switched, and then come back to the present moment as if my past is different now. And I like really felt that. And that was incredibly profound experience. Equally as profound as the drug experience was, but came a week later, not on drugs, just as a result. I felt literally like a slightly different person. Well, yeah, same guy, but what my past meant to me was changed, I suppose. Yeah. I would say the psychedelics have changed my life. I mean, I can also think of a mushroom answer where I'm like, well, but I was already the person that ate the mushrooms before I ate the mushrooms, so yeah, I mean, I'm sure I want to believe that everything, any of the ways I'm different are also achievable outside of these things, but I don't know, I guess it doesn't matter really. Yeah, just like such beautiful gifts. The fact that you can just eat this little mushroom that just like grows out of a pile of poop, or some rice or wherever, in some grass. You can just pop it and just like blast it open to the beauty of the universe. That's another chapter of every mushroom trip, where you're just like, what the hell? This is crazy. If mushrooms didn't, or if these things didn't change my life, they like at least really turned up the beauty and the gratitude in it, for sure. Someone called them a gratuitous grace. I forget who. It's just such a fun, wonderful thing to have in the world. Just like, thank you.